Good day. I, Herna Velasco, along with my partner Mel Patrick D. Malinis, are here to present to you our undergraduate final thesis presentation. It is entitled The Performance Evaluation of the Novel 3D Printed Aquatic Plant-Microbial Fuel Cell Assembly with Eichhornia crassipes. We are under the guidance of Dr. Kristopher Ray S. Pamintuan. This presentation is divided into four parts consisting of the introduction, the methodology, the results and discussion, and the conclusion.
Good day, everyone. I am Mel Patrick Malinis, and I will be discussing the first chapter of our study. It goes without saying that everything has been reliant on non-renewable energy sources to suffice the global energy needs. Consumption of such, however, leads to emissions such as greenhouse gases and ultimately leads to adverse effects in our environment. Our country, unfortunately, is one of the countries that is reliant on non-renewable energy sources, particularly coal and gas. But the problem does not lie on how much of which do we consume. Rather, the main challenge for us is how can we transition from fully relying on non-renewables to renewables. We need to smooth out this transition, and a possible solution is by capitalizing on simple and cost-effective renewable energy technologies. An example of which is the plant microbial fuel cell. Essentially, PMFCs are makeshift batteries whose fuel are organic deposits on plant roots, called rhizodeposits. These organic matters are then consumed and oxidized by electrogenic bacteria present in the rhizosphere, which then gives free electrons in the process. PMFCs capture these electrons through their polarized electrode configuration, ultimately generating electricity. Okay, so provided in the succeeding tables are some of the existing studies focusing on PMFCs. Apart from the terrestrial plants, aquatic plants have also served as the model plants for these studies, among which are water hyacinth, water spinach, and water clover, as shown in the table. Despite the abundance of studies in this field, there are still untapped areas that must be explored. As such, there is a need to develop a PMFC design that will make use of a 3D printing technology and explore its performance on aquatic applications. In this study, a novel 3D printed PMFC was designed and developed to investigate its performance on aquatic applications. Also, instead of graphite and other usual electrode materials, a conductive filament was used for the study. The objectives of the study are to evaluate the performance of the novel design for aquatic PMFCs. Next is to determine its potential by comparing to the power densities of aquatic PMFCs from existing studies. And finally, to standardize the design by determining the optimum electrode surface area ratios via anode limited and cathode limited variations. This study only focused on the design aspects of the PMFC. As such, the following are outside the umbrella of the study. This concludes the first chapter of our study. Moving on to the methodology.
Proceeding to the second chapter of the study, the methodology. The design of the 3D printed aquatic PMFC is analogous to that of a laundry clip. It is mainly composed of three parts: the anode, the separator, and the cathode. All components were 3D printed wherein the electrodes, the anode, and the cathode were printed using 1.75 millimeters protopasta conductive polylactic acid or PLA, while the separator were printed using the CTREE polyethylene terephthalate glycol filaments or PETG. In this study, three PMFC systems labeled as A, B, and C were developed with three replicates each on System B and System C. System A utilized the design with the original dimensions, while System B and C have anode limited and cathode limited variations in surface areas. Shown in the table below are the parameters observed on each system throughout the study. Shown here are the designs for System A, B, and C. Here are the actual 3D prints of the aquatic PMFCs. Using the SolidWorks 3D modeling software, the nominal electrode surface areas for each PMFC system's anode and cathode were calculated. These values are essential in calculating the CA ratio of each system.
The model plant used in our study was water hyacinth or Eichhornia crassipes and was sourced from a lake in Taguig City, Philippines. All plants were selected and acclimated continuously in 68-liter water basins with dechlorinated tap water substrate under partial shading until visible white roots are observable in the plant. Additionally, digital multimeter and solderless breadboard were utilized for the voltage and current readings of the experiment. The overall experimental procedure of the study can be summarized by the flowchart provided. Essentially, the systems undergone a pre-test and post-test apart from the actual experiment proper. For the pre-experimentation, resistance and initial polarization tests were conducted. For the experimental proper, voltage and current readings for both the open and closed circuits of all systems were measured for 21 days. Multiple readings from 8 a.m., 12 noon, 4 p.m., and 8 p.m. were held in the first 14 days. After the 21-day experiment, a final polarization test was held to determine the maximum power densities of all systems. Also, to investigate the effect of plant health to PMFC performance, a follow-up experiment was held. Here, the plants of the best performing and least performing systems were swapped, and the voltage and current readings for open and closed circuits were measured for 5 days. The raw data obtained from these experiments were voltage and current values. From here, power, power density, and current density were calculated. Graphs of voltage, current, power, and power densities were plotted against time, and cathode to anode surface area ratios were also generated from these values. Finally, to further support the claims concluded by the study, a pairwise t-test was used to validate the differences of the compared variables.
Moving on to the third chapter of the study, the results and discussion. In the study of electrochemical systems, a key component in the construction of the system to be studied is the electrode. Currently, there are numerous established materials available. This includes the metallic electrodes in the form of stainless steel and carbon, which is mostly preferred due to its high conductivity, low resistance, and porous nature. Moreover, in recent studies, the use of additive manufacturing, particularly via 3D printing technology, has also been used for constructing conductive electrodes, predominantly by the use of conductive polylactic acid (PLA) filaments. However, unlike other materials, this filaments is only composed of a fixed amount of conductive material or carbon black and its matrix, particularly 53% carbon black by mass and 26.5% by volume in commercial conductive PLAs. As a consequence, the resistivities of these filaments are higher than those of purely conductive materials such as graphite and copper. The comparison of the resistivity of the plates in this study against the other electrode materials are shown in the figure below, while the conductive PLA in this study were 0.5 kiloohms and 0.61 kiloohms for the cathode and anode respectively. In assessing the PMFC system performance, the average voltage and average current are plotted versus its time for comparison of each PMFC system. For closed circuit, each selected system is measured against its different resistance values: 20 kiloohms for system A and B10, 24 kiloohms for system B2, B6, and C2, 50 kiloohms for system C6, and 43 kiloohms for system C10. From this, it is apparent that all systems exhibit an increasing yet dynamic trend, which is mostly attributable to the sudden voltage and current reading peaks and drops on some days. As observed from the daily average measurements of power and power density graph, it can be seen that it corresponds a similar trend with voltage and current readings, whereas all systems exhibit an increasing but still dynamic trend. This significantly confirms that PMFC system performance. The dynamic trend exhibited by both graphs is primarily attributable to uncontrollable external factors such as weather, measurement contact points, and plant health, which have a substantial impact on the readings of each system. Upon evaluating the response of the PMFC systems relative to their measurement periods, it was determined that both of the voltage and current readings peak at 8 p.m., indicating that the power generation of each system is maximum at night. Statistically, the average voltage measurement at this time period is significantly larger compared to 12 noon at alpha of 0.05. This occurrence is hypothesized by the researchers as a result of the delayed release of organic substrate on the roots of the plant, attributed by the PMFC being situated under partial shading. Since based on the context of biochemistry, plants' metabolic processes can be generally classified into two: the light-dependent reaction, the photosynthesis, and the light-independent reaction, the cellular respiration. In the case of this study, photosynthesis occurs at a lesser rate than the cellular respiration on the plant, and thus most of its metabolic processes occur at night. From this, it can be inferred that the system benefit more from the light-independent reaction, the cellular respiration, than from the photosynthesis. Here, system A is at a CA ratio of 1.87, while the ratios less than and greater than 1.87 corresponds to system B and system C and B respectively. As a plot shows, the design has been found to benefit from increasing the surface area ratio, so the cathode surface area, as increasing the power and density trend also increases the CA ratio. This significantly suggests that the PMFC is cathode limited and its design aspect should be focused on the cathode. In electrochemical reactions, the rate of this half cell reaction should be equal to sustain the stable electricity generation. Considering that the design is cathode limited, or reduction, therefore occurs at a slower rate than oxidation. Consequently, too many protons from oxidation from the anode are transported onto the cathode, which cannot immediately process. To compensate for this drawback, a larger cathode surface area is desired to open more sites for reduction and match the rate of anode half cell reaction. Hence, A ratio of 2:1 between cathode and anode surface area is optimal for this design. However, above certain ratios, additional resistances will accumulate and eventually hamper the output power. While observed fluctuations in ratios 0.97 millimeter squared over millimeter squared and 1.92 millimeter squared over millimeter squared might be due to faulty cells and uncontrollable factors. To further investigate the effect of plant health on the PMFC performance, the plants of the best performing System A, B6, and System, and the least performing systems, System C6, B2, and B10, were swapped, and their corresponding voltage readings were measured according to their peak time every day for 5 days. Shown here are the graphs of the comparison of the average daily voltage readings of the system with the original plants and the swap plants, whereas the voltage reading of the best performing systems had dropped after swapping the plants with those with the least performing systems. This is evident on the system B2, one of the least performing systems, as its voltage reading increased after swapping of the plants. Statistically, there has also been a significant difference between the average voltage of the swap and the original plants for both open and closed systems at alpha of 0.05.
Shown here are the polarization curves expressed as graphs of voltage versus resistance for all systems. Clearly, the graphs show that the voltage and ultimately power densities obtained for System B are higher than those obtained from System C. This agrees with our findings that the design is cathode limited, since this clearly shows that the design indeed benefits upon increasing the cathode surface area rather than decreasing it. The average maximum power densities for System A, B, and C obtained from polarization are 26.99, 36.24, and 6.81 microwatts per square meters, respectively. Finally, the highest maximum power density obtained in this study was 82.54 microwatts per square meters from System B6. In conjunction with the polarization, plots of voltage versus current were also plotted for each system. These curves, although not entirely similar, exhibit trends that reflect those of the VI curves for batteries and generators. Specifically, the trends of VI curves generated from the study follow an almost linearly decreasing trend, whereas those of batteries and generators follow a decreasing logarithmic trend. The structure of VI curves can be seen to be divided into three parts, as shown in the figure. According to the study of Simeon et al. In 2020, these regions actually correspond to the activation, ohmic, and mass transfer losses, respectively. Knowing these characteristics of VI curves is essential towards optimizing PMFC performance, since this helps us to identify what PMFCs are lacking to achieve comparable performance as batteries and generators. Suffice to say, PMFCs are akin to batteries and generators since they also generate and store their own electricity, as demonstrated by the results of the study. If the ohmic losses of the design were to be sufficiently minimized, such that it achieves a decreasing logarithmic trend rather than a linear one, PMFCs can demonstrate the performance of a battery and generator hybrid. So to conclude the performance evaluation of this design, comparison of its maximum power density to those of the aquatic PMFCs from the literature was done and summarized in the table shown. Clearly, the performance of the designed aquatic PMFC in the study is not yet on par with those from the literature. This simply brings us back to the fact that conductive PLA only has limited amounts of conductive materials in its matrix, and as such, expected to facilitate less power generation than PMFCs utilizing purely conductive electrode materials. Also, it has been found out that the performance of the PMFC systems do depend on the plant health and not on electrode material nor its surface area alone. Case in point, PMFCs are complex systems that is an interplay between several factors, not limited to design aspects alone.
Overall, the study assessed the performance of a 3D printed aquatic PMFC using conductive PLA as the electrode material, whereas a maximum power density of 82.54 microwatts per meter squared was achieved. The design has an optimum cathode-anode ratio, surface area ratio of 2:1. Additionally, the PMFC performance is not only limited to the electrode surface area alone, as the plant health also plays a role. Polarization studies also suggest that PMFCs can be a hybrid of battery and generator. Further investigation on factors affecting the PMFC performance that were unexplored in this study, such as the substrate pH and the oxygen level. The use of a different conductive filament and other potential materials is also suggested to determine the optimum electrode material for the design. Finally, the scale-up and power amplification studies such as stacking performance are suggested to further investigate the potential of the design and in general, the aquatic PMFCs with 3D printed components. Again, we are Velasco and Malinis. Thank you.